So without too much ado, I'd like to invite Claire up here to start us off with a talk on some of the lesser known parts of the religious tapestry of Australia. Claire's a great friend, and she's perhaps the most qualified of all of us as far as public speaking goes. She's done a few TED Talks and some articles in very prominent publications. But I won't spoil too much, so let's give her a round of applause.
Good evening. How is everybody tonight? I'm glad to see you all here. So, my name is Claire Ashman, and it's actually ironic that today is St. Patrick's Day. It's one of the three main feasts in the Catholic Church for March. We have St. Patrick's Day on March 17, then we have St. Joseph on March 19, and then we have the Annunciation on the 25th, when the angel Gabriel came down to the Virgin Mary to tell her she was pregnant. I don't actually believe that anymore, but I just thought I'd throw it in there because it shows me how Catholic I was brought up. But also, my maiden name was McAuliffe, and I am a direct descendant of John McAuliffe, who arrived here in Australia in 1845. So that's a little bit of history, more a little bit of ancient history, older history I suppose, on this St. Patrick's Day. So I thought I'd start with that as just a bit of fun. But that's really a segue into my life, and I'm only going to share a small part of it tonight because it is rather large and it's very difficult to understand for those who are, I don't want to say not Catholic, but if you've been brought up in the normal Catholicism, you don't know about this other shady side of true Catholicism, like I was brought up in. So I am the daughter of one of the founding families of a sect in Australia. This sect it actually began overseas, but there was an arm of it here, and it's now all over the world with millions of followers. So initially I was brought up in a sect. So now it's very difficult to try and find, there's many different descriptions of a sect. So this comes from Lorne Dawson, who wrote a book, The Sociology of New Religious Movements, I think it's called, but anyway, I've got references at the end. So this is the best description of the group that I grew up in. So they tend to be splinter groups from mainstream traditions that are seeking to revive what they think to be the religion, the original or pure spirit of the religious tradition they are rebelling against. So, now when I first said this word to Tom Ackner, he goes, "Are you swearing at me?" No, I'm not. It's sedevacantism. So it's actually a Latin word meaning vacant seat, and it will pop up in my talk. So I thought I'd better just sort of let you all know the meaning of it. And there are sedevacantist groups around, and basically they believe that there has not been a true pope on the throne of Peter since Pius XII. Pope Pius XII's reign from 1939 to 1958. He was like the Second World War pope. This is a little bit more complicated. Has anybody heard of Vatican II? Yeah. Do you understand much of it, or you just no? So Vatican II is basically when we had, as I've got up here, John the 23rd, he decided that the Catholic Church needed some updating. And so we needed to have some fresh air come through the Catholic Church, update things, and unite some of the factions. That was the idea. And so most people went with that, but there were some that didn't. So Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, he is a French-Swiss archbishop. He was one of the main dissenters of the Second Vatican Council. So he believed that there should not be any updates in the Catholic Church. In fact, we should even harken back further, tighten things up as much as they can, because we can't let modernism, communism, or anything else, and woe betide any women having any sexual rights or bodily rights or anything else rights. We need to, rein them all in. So he actually spent quite a few years as a missionary in South Africa. There is a book which I have referenced, but it's called The Horn of the Unicorn. But it's written by one of his followers. Actually, I had to read it for another course that I did, and oh my god, very racist and horrible. Really made me sort of gulp. So this is Marcel Lefebvre on his second visit to Australia. Before I go on, because I've written down some other things. So with the Vatican II, as with all the updates, they had sweeping updates. So the Mass was, instead of being said in Latin, with the priest having his back facing the people, now said Mass, as a lot of you probably have seen, in movies, or if you've been to churches where they stand, like this, and say Mass facing the people. And everything was pared back. So the Mass was pared back, like a lot of the old rituals, the prayers were pared back. Basically it was short, sharp and to the point. Let's get them in, get them out. And as long as they're practicing, that was what it was. So traditional groups sprung up all over the place. And here in Australia there was one called the Latin Mass Society, which started in 1966. And Archbishop Lefebvre actually came out and visited before this, so to visit the Latin Mass Society. So they were a small group which eventually got swallowed up into the Society of St. Pius X, which I'll explain in a minute. But as a small tangent, there was actually somebody famous here in Australia who was part of that initial group, and it was Mel Gibson's dad, Hutton Gibson. He even had his own chapel. But then later on, he went one step further and decided to become a sedevacantist, hence why I had the word up there. They're even stricter. So they're even stricter than the Society of St. Pius X. Now, this is a personal photo. It's not one that I put out in the public because I actually know that person there. I've known him since 1979, and these photos there's him in a couple more photos as well, and this is he left for the seminary in June 1982. So this would have been 1986, I think. So, but I wanted to show you, this is actually, so Archbishop Lefebvre actually started his own seminary in Icone in Switzerland, and this is part of their chapel. So that's their chapel. So he initially had permission from the local ordinary, from another archbishop, but it was later reneged. It was just a permission really, but then they could see that Archbishop Lefebvre was going a little bit, too far and being too strict. And so it was later reneged, and because then they hoped that if they ignored it, it might go away, but unfortunately, no, it didn't. So he adhered to tradition strictly. Look, I remember being, 6 maybe? I was brought up in Victoria. I was about 6, and then my mum heard about a group of Morris brothers in Mount Macedon, and they were literally throwing out all the books, pre-1962, and my mum went with a trailer. We actually helped her collect all these books, and she's still got them all stored in 44-gallon drums, can you believe it, even now. All old stuff, So, why is the group named Society of St. Pius X? Because Pope Pius X actually reigned during the First World War, and he was known to be vigorously opposing modernism under all auspices, really. And so Archbishop Lefebvre chose him as patron of his order, or his mascot. So that's what they decided to do. So this is a picture of their actual chapel. And these are the old vestments. These are called Roman vestments. And so with those vestments, nowadays you find that when the priest wears the vestments, they're very pared down. It's not like the old way. Like the old way, I was actually taught by my mother to actually lay out all the vestments. So a priest would wear the black cassock and the collar, dog collar, you know, often just as a piss take. But then everything was laid out. So you would have the outer robes, obviously, you know, going last. But each one, they all had to be laid out a certain way, and there had to be a prayer said. The priest would say a prayer as he put on each one. So it sounds very extreme, but I learned all this. And all the linens there's a certain amount of linens, they all mean something. Has to be pure, 100% pure Irish linen. That's where it has to be. That's the ruling of the church. And they all have to be starched, and I learned how to starch them. They were stiff as a board. And then the smaller ones that the host touched had to be all folded and ironed a certain way. Like with certain priests, they all had to be exact. Everything had to be exact. Even the altar had to be a certain amount of inches off the floor. So if it wasn't, my dad made an altar, like a wooden altar, with a recess in it for altar stone. So an altar stone is pure marble and has this little square in it. It's probably maybe an inch and a half square, and it has a cross like embedded in it. But underneath that, it usually has a relic of a saint, and then it's like glued down really tightly. So, and that's also wrapped in linen, and that goes into the recess of the altar. So, but the altar has to be a certain amount of inches off the floor. So, again, this is Scotty, the guy that I knew. The top photo is interesting because as I was scanning it, I've got a whole heap of photos and they've got things written on the back, and I hadn't actually taken any notice. This is their bomb shelter. The top one is their bomb shelter. Yes, we're leading down the road of apocalyptic theories, which I grew up with, but they've sort of, morphs along a little bit more. So, yes. Now, so how do I fit into all this? This priest here, Father Augustine Cummins, I was 4 years old when my mum met him at a local church that we would go to in Ballarat. It was actually the old Redemptorist monastery. So the Redemptorists were founded by Alphonsus Liguori in 1732. So he used to wear the cassock, and he used to have these massive rosary beads with a huge crucifix hanging off them, like massive. And he got talking to my mum, and he mentioned how the church had gone way too far. He believes that the church had gone way, way too far, and there was only a small remnant, and this, we were the faithful remnant, and these were just small pockets of true Catholics that kept the true word of God, and, we adhered to everything by the book. And he actually started saying Mass in our lounge room. So, and there were people that, I remember this. In fact, two people who originally came to our house in Ballarat in 1974, both passed away in December, one aged 99, the other one aged 76. Yes. And they actually were there at the Mass that he was saying in my parents' lounge room. And then it just grew, it just like mushroomed like you would not believe. At first it was in our lounge room, and then he found an old church in Melbourne, an old Protestant church that was being unused, and he asked for permission to say Mass there. And so there were people that was like central, and then people from all over Victoria. We travelled 2 hours one way to Mass every Sunday. Yes. And not just that, we had to get up early. We had cows, goats, pigs, sheep, chickens, the whole lot. We had to get up and milk and feed, like milk the animal, the cows and goats, and feed all the animals and everything else. I'm the eldest of 9. I had to get all of my siblings up and get them ready. And we had to be at Mass, so Mass started at 9. We had to be there by 7:45 because the McCall of kids were the best kids, because we went to confession every week. the first ones to line up. But then we used to do something that annoyed Mum. We'd come out and then we'd compare penances, because sometimes you'd get, 2 Our Fathers, 5 Hail Marys, a Nicene Creed. Like, you have to be bad to get a Nicene Creed. What did you do? So, but then my whole life changed, and it changed from being carefree and being able to wear red tartan overalls. I should have put that picture in actually. My red tartan overalls, to never being allowed to wear jeans, t-shirts, pants of any sort. When we went to mass, myself and my sisters had to wear a scarf over our head, and we as girls were taught that the Virgin Mary was the ultimate woman to espouse after. She was our example. So we were taught to be submissive, we were subjugated, we were taught that we had no opinion, we were taught that, basically we had 2 choices. Be a nun, because you've got to give up your free will to God. I mean, you're told you're born with free will, but then you've got to do God's will. It doesn't make sense, does it? So you're taught that you've got free will, but you should give up that free will willingly to be a nun, and I thought, hell no. And then you're supposed to get married and have a squid in children because you're supposed to populate heaven. So, that was tough, and everything, we would say, I don't know whether any of you are familiar with the rosary. It takes about 15 minutes to say, it's bloody repetitive. We would say 1 a day. Mum tried to get us to say 2, but that was a bit of a failure. Well, we all had to kneel up. And actually, slight tangent, my second husband, I asked him to genuflect. And do you know what he does? He goes like this, he goes, and it's so funny, he can't do it. Proper genuflection is this. See? I know how to do it. So when I do CrossFit and there's lunges, it's really a genuflection. So I know how to do it properly. But then you see these other people go like this and you're like, oh my God, it's painful. Don't do that. So, so for me, it was, for me now, I've taken the gold out of my past life. It was very hard at the beginning when I first left. This is only the first part of my story, but when I finally left religion behind, I was 36 years old, I had 8 children, aged 16 and a 2. And I'd never lived a single life. I'd never travelled, never been to uni, none of the things. So here I was, landed in, out in the world, and I literally had no idea how it worked. I had no bank account, I'd never worked, or, not in a long-term job. I was a checkout chick for a while, but before I got married, but it was really, really hard for me. So, but now when I look back on it, I grew up on 20 acres, I'm the oldest of 9 kids. I can fix fences, I can milk cows and goats, I can separate cream and churn butter and make bread. So I'm great in a crisis. That's what I can do. So that's about, for me, when I share my story, it is about taking the lessons and the gold that I learned from my past. This is the left-hand picture is my first communion on Easter Sunday, 1976. Ironically, that is also the cover of the autobiography that I've written as well. The photo on the right, that is when Archbishop Lefebvre came out in 1981. That's my confirmation, that's me being confirmed. And you can see Father Cummins on the right there. This was also taken afterwards, the day after. So there's Archbishop Lefebvre on the right there with another, he was a brother Alban. And then that's me with most of my siblings at the time. And then my younger sister wasn't born until 1984. And then that was completed then. We had nine kids. And I thought that I would finish up with, the child virgin bride reaching the ultimate. Here we were, 26th of November 1988, that's me. And this was, I thought I'd take it in the church where you have all the pomp and ceremony. I know that Nicholas likes all the pomp and the ceremony. So I put that in there. So basically I got married young at 18 and a half because I didn't think that I really had a choice. Tertiary education was not encouraged at all. I actually wanted to be a nurse because my mum and my aunt were nurses, and I thought it was a lovely vocation, I thought, helping people to get better. But then at the time, this was like 1986, 87 when I thought of that, and then at that time, my mum was actually a nurse and working as a nurse, and she said, and at that time, they were having university students, so they were doing, instead of doing the nursing, teaching the nurses in the hospitals, they were teaching in the universities. And Mum was saying, you know, how awful it was, what dreadful modern ideas these nurses have, and abortion, my God, like, what if you had to help her out with an abortion? That's a mortal sin, you can go to hell for that. So I got scared because I didn't know that there was any other choice, so I got married. And so I got married young and ended up by having all of these children. So, for me, like I said, this is only the first part of my story. I'm happy to take any questions. Now, there is an academic, Bernard Doherty. He comes from Charles Sturt University, and I have done some work with him. And I'll just read you a little bit from his latest paper. It's not edited fully at the moment, but he sent it to me a couple of weeks ago. So the best explanation of Vatican II actually comes from a sociologist and priest, Andrew Greeley, and he describes it here. The leaders of the secondary revolution banned statues, stained glass windows, votive candles, crucifixes and representative art from new or remodeled churches. They rejected popular devotions like May crownings, processions, first communions, incense, classical polyphony and Gregorian chant. They dismissed the rosary, angels, saints, the souls in purgatory and Mary, the mother of Jesus. They considered these old customs liturgically or ecumenically or politically incorrect. And so that's basically what happened in Vatican II. There was this wide sweeping change. And a lot of people, like I look at it now and understanding it backwards, or wisdom in hindsight, is that like my mum was actually a nun before she got married. She trained to be a nurse in St John of God Sisters in Subiaco in Western Australia. And that was her vocation. She loved it. She absolutely loved it. But then she got psoriasis, which is a bit like eczema, all over her head. And despite everything they tried, there was not a cure for it, like it didn't go away. So her superiors decided that it was a sign from God, that she did not have a vocation anymore, so they just ousted her. They just said, okay, you've got to go home to your mum. And then when you think about that, like the trauma of that, like knowing that being a nun was her whole life, it had all, you know, you had all your rituals and your prayers and your learnings, and you had everything all set out for you, and then to just be literally ousted. I can only think of all the trauma, religious trauma she would have had in just trying to adjust to the real world. So that would have been really tough for her. And so when, you know, Father Cummins came to her and, you know, told her about how the church had gone too far, you know, it just felt comforting. She just didn't like, it was not just her, there's millions of people around the world now that just don't like the changes in the Catholic Church. And this is, you know, like, this is something like, you know, 60 years ago. It's, you know, it's 60 years past Vatican II, and, you know, people are still rejecting it. So it's interesting. So now, if any of you have questions, feel free. Nothing's off the table, by the way.
If we're on the pomp and ceremony and all that, you talk a lot, there's this real focus on there being back into all these little bits of ceremony, about like the height of the lectern and all these things. Do you get the sense that people who care so much about having such extreme lines to maintain all that, is it those little details that they genuinely care about, or are those things just symbolic of broader issues, and that becomes a way for them to kind of express their, you know, anger at this liberalisation and all that through these little bits of dress and that kind of thing?
Well, it's, see, when, according to how I was brought up, like the Mass itself is based on Judaism. That's what I was told. And then the Catholic churches are all built like the old Catholic churches. I'm talking about the ones in more recent years that have been built. But like when you have the actual altar rails. So you have one step, then you have the altar rails. That one step means something. Then there's a gap, and then there's 3 more steps. That's like entering the Holy of Holies in Judaism. So you have one, you always have to start with the right foot. And again, you always genuflect with the right knee because the right knee belongs to God. So it's 1, 2, 3. And then when the altar boys start, they start by kneeling on the bottom step. And it's only after they've said the Confitia, then they can rise to the next step. So it's all symbolic. And I think that they like that because they like all that symbolism, because in their minds, they're doing everything right. They're doing everything according to the law. And I mean, when I grew up, I was special because I had the one true faith. Like, I mean, I look at it now, it's very arrogant and judgmental. But I was special. I was special because I had the one true faith and I was practicing everything exactly to the law. But I've come to see that it is very judgmental and it is very arrogant, and I don't like it.
So the Catholic Church is like other traditions within the church, right? Like the Easter rites and all those things.
Yes.
What do you think is the view of like both Pius and society? What's their view of other traditions?
Well, they don't have the light. They haven't been guided by the Holy Ghost. So in their view, they're the ones holding strictly to tradition. They've got the truth. They're being guided by the Holy Ghost, and they are, they're leading the way. So they're the shining light that everybody else has to follow. So
we say the society is very against like current trend of like ecumenism.
oh hell yes, yeah, hell yes. They actually got excommunicated in 1988 because Archbishop Lefebvre didn't like the fact that he deemed that the Catholic Church was moving further and further into modernism, so he wanted to, and because he was getting on in age, he wanted to ensure that the line continued, because they'd never be able to get any other bishops to be able to ordain their priests. So he actually approached Pope John Paul II and asked him about consecrating his own bishops, and the Pope actually told him to hold off because he would probably help him to choose a bishop. And I guess thinking about John Paul's thoughts, he would probably choose somebody that was like, a bit in between. But Lefebvre didn't wait. On June 29th, 1988, June 30, 1988, he consecrated 4 bishops off his own bat, and he got excommunicated the very next day. So they're all excommunicated the very next day. He knew it was coming.
Also, I think the society speeches with Da Vinci Code, right? The movie.
No, that's the Opus Dei.
Okay.
Yeah, Opus Dei are probably they're secretive. Yeah, but they're the only sect in the Catholic Church that have what you call their own personal prelature, which means they answer to one particular cardinal. They don't have to answer to anybody else, and they don't have to be incardinated into a diocese. So incardination is when you have when a priest is ordained, he's sent to a certain parish. So if you have you might have a group of ordinations in Sydney, say, and then they might need one up here to Brisbane. So the Archbishop of Sydney will say, well, I'm sending you so-and-so. He'll tell the Archbishop of Brisbane, and then they have to have a certain ceremony that, this priest now belongs to the city of Brisbane and he will now be at this parish. So, yes?
In that photo you showed of the father in the bunker, did that particular church tend more towards a bit of a doomsday style?
Yeah, well, that bunker is underneath the seminary in Icone, so the one that Archbishop Lefebvre started. So yes, they do believe that. Like especially now with the war in Ukraine, that Russia is spreading her evils, and they're probably saying that this is the Third World War, but I'll get more into that and with another talk on it, because it's there's a lot to it. There's a lot to it. Anybody else? Oh, yes.
Sorry, two things quickly. First of all, you mentioned the Ukraine bit. Do they apply to the whole, King of the North teachings? I noticed some, particularly American conservatives, have sort of lined up this view of like the King of the North lying with Russia in their interpretation of religious text. Also, sorry, the main question which I had was actually, you mentioned sort of arrogance as well, and at least one which I've heard commonly from people who belong to very, very, very deeply conservative religious cults is that arrogance is a common mindset. Do you think that's sort of a tool of enforcement or control for members of the group to kind of imbue them with that arrogance to sort of keep them there?
It's more of not a God complex, but it's more about like we have the truth. We're special, we're going to be saved, you're not. And it's, we will preach to you, and, if your heart is open and you're humble, well, then you'll listen to us because we're right. Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, I can fall straight into it. I was doing an interview once and he was asking me this question, I just fell straight into it, like, in terms of, like, I knew what I was doing, but I just gave him the whole rhetoric, and he just looked at me and he went, "Oh my God, do you believe that?" And I said, "Hell no, I just brought up like that. I just know what they say and how they try and like convert people." But it is, you do feel very special when you're part of a group like that. Like when you're absolutely in it all the time and you only listen to that and you only hear that and you follow it and all the rest of it, it is very much you do get that real arrogance that you have the truth and that everybody else is wrong.
Sorry, very quickly, someone asked a question.
Yeah.
Just quickly, that humbleness line is something I find quite funny because that's another one that's very, very common with these groups. Like I know, at least hearing from extroverts witnesses, their typical thing is that they're told they're not humble enough if they don't believe. When they can't humble themselves to the teaching, it's like, yeah, but they've actually humbled themselves to other people, not just to you.
Yeah, that's it. Yes.
Yeah, but these are little sort of sects of Catholicism. I know Catholicism doesn't tend to be so hard on evangelical traditions as others. But do these subsects engage in any form of like evangelical activity? Like, is there outreach for these sort of groups, or do they tend to be very insular?
Not this particular sect. It tends to be like quite insular, and like they're open to people joining, but then once you're in, you're in. You're in like Flynn. You can't back out then because you're a true Catholic. My own mum said to me probably about 10 years ago that there was a special place in hell for mothers who led their children there, and so I was going there. But I'd reached a point where I just like couldn't care less at that point. I just said, "That's fabulous. I had a great time." It took me a while to get there though. I knew I'd reached it probably in 2015 when it was Good Friday. I went to the fridge and I had a piece of salami, but I'd forgotten that it was Good Friday, and I ate the salami. And then afterwards it was like, "Oh, do I feel any guilt?" No. And then I knew I was over the line. So yeah. Did you have any other questions or not? Because if there's not, you can.
Let's all give Sarah a really nice applause.
Thank you again, Claire. I will say, just as a side note, I grew up in a very atheist household, and I went to an Anglican school. It wasn't that special. But hearing your story originally, and now for my honours, I've been getting into a history of spiritualism and looking at all these religious movements. It is shocking how much is going on in our backyard that we just don't pay attention to. And I never noticed it, but there's in Brisbane, there's satanic cults, there's weird theosophical societies, there's so much going on that we just don't really pay attention to unless you're kind of tapped into that world a little bit. And it feels a little bit Da Vinci Code. You get that vibe a little bit. But we're going to have time, not too bad. So,